No,
that?
madam.
No, madam. No, madam.
Magtail, I know. Anyway, while the movement, I'm talking of the freedom movement and women's agency in the freedom movement, and while the movement encouraged female participation, it also tried to spatially delimit women's activity to only the domestic site. So domestic site in the sense that it is the home place, the home space within the home. They try to delimit it there. So my concern today is that of the home space itself. So even when women did come out of the domestic space to participate in the nationalist movement in the public space, then the home continued to be active. Okay. So this is one significant thing because the features of the home got extended to the public domain. In fact, here I would like to quote one Black American academic and activist, Gloria Jean Watkins. In fact, she has a pen name, Bell Hooks, Bellhooks, all small. There is no capital here. It's a pen name. So she describes the home place as a site of resistance, where a person's spirit is fostered or the growth happens with support from others within the home space. So home place, if we take up the political significance of the home space, it continued to be, at least in the nationalist movement, it continued to be very relevant, whether women fought from the workspace or it got extended to the public domain. It continued to be relevant. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi ji had this kind of a vision in encouraging female agency or in envisaging female agency in the nationalist movement. He was well aware of the family dynamics. That is, the family could either foster women, support women in such a activity, or it could also impede women's participation in the nationalist movement. So the idea was for women to contribute from within the private space where they could be politically active. So if women were involved in the movement, as far as Gandhiji was concerned, it was not to dismantle the household or threaten the existing domestic ideology. So in the process of politicizing the domestic sphere, Gandhiji tried to establish a link between women's private lives as well as the nation's political and economic life. So that is why in many of his early writings, Gandhiji, at least in the 20s, Gandhiji considered home as a natural space of women. So, well, it was this space. We all know as students of history, it was the domestic space which had been for long the focus of the social reform movement. Because when we speak of social reform movement, it is women and reform that became important. So it was, I have difficulty in accepting the term emancipating. It is only some kind of a change, some kind of a reform that was brought in women's position. It was not in total. Well, it was not an emancipation at all. But this space, which had been the focus, at least in the 19th century, closing decades of 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century. But by 1920s and 30s, social reform itself, the debate itself was not as acrimonious as it had been earlier. In fact, Partha Chatterjee observes that the new woman that was created, see, this new woman was created with the launch of the social reform movement because a little bit of education and so on came to be provided to women, because female education was also one of the reforms that came to be taken up. So this kind of a new woman was to complement the new class of men or the new patriarchy that had been created. And this patriarchy was, of course, of the middle classes, this new middle class that had been created. In fact, Partha Chatterjee speaks of elements of modernity selected what was to be compatible with the new woman. That is, she was to be educated in domestic sciences, he speaks of, and besides that, she should be able to read nationalist as well as religious texts and run the household in accordance with the changes that had been taking place outside the domestic space. So, Partha Chatterjee further speaks of the home, and he says that this was also a site of resubjection of women. Women are already been subjected, but a new way women came to be resubjected in this site. So it was silencing for middle class women because women could not speak for themselves, they did not have a voice. So he investigates how women struggled against the kind of subjection they were reduced to. Well, they had to cope with the changes that were taking place, and they had to contribute from within the home. So, taking into cognizance some of these aspects, of course, if we go through some of the autobiographies, also accounts, we do come across this kind of an admission that came to be made by women. However, women actually remained largely inarticulate, and they were also hardly awakened. And this social element did respond to Gandhiji's call. It was like a clarion call that came to be given by Gandhi, and they began to respond to it. Well, women were located firmly within the household chores or household work and childcare, and this was considered as a legitimate concern insofar as women were concerned. Okay, they were sought to be mobilized from this space by the Mahatma. This was also a time when Gandhiji had been in the 20s. Gandhiji had been talking about, excuse me, excuse me. This was also a time when Gandhiji had been condemning child marriages, enforced widowhood, and dowry, parda, and such of the practices which continued despite the kind of a reform movement and despite legislations having been passed. So he said that the society that countenanced such of the social practices would recede from God and also from Swaraj. So for Gandhi, what was essential for him, to essential means of targeting women, was the home, and within the home it was Khadi. So Khadi came to be brought in as a political tool by Gandhi, and in fact, Khadi as a political tool was already there in the Tilakite phase, in the Swadeshi movement. In fact, there were several melas and exhibitions organized, and some of these also happened in the Uttara Kannada provinces, which had Bombay, Karnataka, at least, where Tilak's influence was quite strong. So melas were organized, but if we take up the number of women that participated, it was very marginal, I could say, very, very limited. Just as women's activity was involved even in the INC meetings. They were more ornamental. That is how they were described as. So it was Gandhiji who tried to integrate Khadi into what he called as women's dharma. So it was, I'm sorry, I'm a little unwell. I'm sorry if there's any disturbance from my side. So it was kind of a reimagination of women as well as the home, insofar as Gandhiji was concerned. So it was a relentless propaganda of Khadi and Khadi wearing that became important. And this was to bring spirit of nationalism and freedom into every home It was not just in the urban spaces, but even villages and even remote areas. Into the hovels, Gandhiji said that the spirit of nationalism through Khadi was to be taken. So spinning, he said, in fact, it is quoted even in Harijan in 1939, that it was to be a peaceful campaign against imperial yoke, wherein women would be given a special status. It was this kind of a political tool was above communal, caste, or class lines. So it was Gandhiji's aim was to unite people, unite India at least against the divide and rule policy of the colonial government. So, spinning became an important tool in empowering women. Now, insofar as Gandhiji was concerned, he felt that empowering women, in the sense that he may not have used that word, but this was one way of filling confidence in women, that they would be, by spinning, they were also contributing to the family, they were earning insofar as the family was concerned, and that they could also feel that economically they were a little independent. And this was also to fill the menfolk, be it children or the other menfolk in the family, with patriotism. This was what Gandhiji said. So it was confidence, and it was to instill patriotism, and it was also contribution of women that became important. Now, speaking in this context, Gandhiji also invoked certain mythological characters, women characters. Sita, Savitri, Damayanti, and Draupadi as symbols of the innate strength of women. And that is supposed to be pure and self controlled. Well, in his speech on women and social injustice in 1918 itself, he said it was the traditional virtues of chastity and purity that got projected as symbols of female strength. This is what he said. They were symbols of female strength. So Draupadi came to be considered as a woman of robust independence, and Sita's virtue, he said, was protected by the khadi sari she wore. Well, this has been highly debated, and the feminists also have a lot of skepticism about accepting many of these statements of Gandhiji. But Gandhiji never repeated any of these statements earlier. I'm sorry, later. So, ever since his entry into the political arena, Gandhiji espoused and valorized the feminine. Okay, the feminine, which of course Ashish Nandi in his The Intimate Enemy, Loss and Recovery of Self Under Colonialism. It's a wonderful book. He observes and says that for Gandhi, I quote him, the essence of femininity is superior to masculinity. Essence of femininity is superior to masculinity. I'm cutting short the quote, which in turn is better than cowardice or failure of masculinity. He further observes, Ashish Nandi further observes that recuperation of femininity within oneself, within himself too, was considered a moral principle. Gandhiji speaks of femininity, ಸ್ತ್ರೀತ್ವ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬ ಪುರುಷನಲ್ಲೂ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. It is there in everyone. Okay. And he considered it as a moral principle and a signifier of civilizational superiority. So it is this feature that is found in among Indians at least, and it also signified India's cultural superiority. This was the kind of a rhetoric Gandhiji made use of in the early stages at least. So one thing Gandhiji wanted to deflect was the colonialist claim that they were the rescuers and they were on a civilizing mission in India. And it was some kind of a divine sanction that they had come to India on a civilizing mission. So this is one perception of the colonialists that Gandhiji wanted to deflect. At the same time, he also tried to present that masculinities of imperialism as violent and highly materialistic and profoundly hegemonic, he said. I unquote Gandhiji. Well, anyway, in countering colonial hegemony, one of the next weapon Gandhiji adopted was non-violence. This was something very new for the colonial masters. They did not know what non-violence was, and neither could they understand it. And for Gandhi, it was the only weapon. Gandhiji, an objective student of history, had also known that violence never paid. Violent fight against the British had brought no result at all. So he considered nonviolence as the only weapon. In such a movement, women were to have, he said, a greater role to play. In fact, during Dandi March, he had never, in fact, envisaged a role for women in the Dandi March because this was in the public space. In fact, it had to be Sarojini Naidu, Chattopadhyay, Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, and others who did defy Gandhi and jumped into the fray of the Dandi March. So, in his appeal to the women of India, he said, if non-violence is the law of our being, the future is with women. This is a very famous quote, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. So, non-violence and mythological characters were found to be appealing to women, even the uneducated and the lower sections, because these mythological women were the living legends insofar as India in those days was concerned. So, however, this phase witnessed. This was also a time when the Women's Indian Association, which had been very active in the demand for suffrage rights, that is, the right to vote for women. But Gandhiji did not display any kind of a overt concern for this demand of the rights of the women. Nor the votes of the women campaign that was launched by the Women's Indian Association. But interestingly, the Women's Indian Association was also closely associated with the nationalist movement. And in fact, this movement, women's movement, was in a dilemma because of its alliance with the one hand they were demanding from the colonial masters the political right, the right to vote, at the same time their alliance with the nationalist movement. And at the same time, we come across Gandhiji also not showing much of a response to this demand of the Women's Indian Association. Well, excuse me. It was in the next phase, that is the civil disobedience movement. Women's activities were more pronounced, at least during this phase. And for the first time, women entered the public sphere. In 1930, in fact, Gandhiji discovered that women were not content with their activities within the domestic space. So, taking his prescriptions for action and adapting to the local circumstances, women donned the role of emotional supporters even when they did not or could not come out of the domestic space and participate in the public space. They remained emotional supporters, particularly when large-scale arrests of the menfolk was happening, and they continued with their stereotypical roles of the mother and wife and all that, but did not violate those traditional traits which are attributed to women and which Gandhiji also upheld. All these traits came to be upheld by Gandhiji. He never questioned it. Well, women's role came to be marked during this phase. We also know of the Aranya Satyagrahas, the Dwaja Satyagrahas, and Satyagrahas against auctioning of cattle, property, household articles. We have innumerable number of examples of this even in the Kannada provinces. And the symbols that came to be adopted by Gandhiji during this phase was land, cow, and salt. Land, cow, and salt. All these had maximum appeal to the people, especially the peasantry. Okay, land, cow, and there was a salt. Land and cow, at least, a strong sentiment of the peasantry. And both were means of living, a source of living for the people. So it was this emotional side that Gandhiji tried to tap. So it was a salt, if we take up, it was an essential ingredient in the food. So people felt that it was our sea, it was our waters, it was our salt manufacturing. So it was ours. So it was this kind of an intimate connection that Gandhiji tried to connect with the lives of the people. This was quite evident in the no tax campaign everywhere that happened, and very significant, of course. We know as students of Karnataka history that it was Shirsi, Siddhapura, and Ankola. So there were also other areas where such of the campaigns were taking place. So Gandhiji, during this phase, addressed and with these issues, and the mode of fight facilitated participation of all stratas of society, that of non-violence. Elite women coming from households which had the tradition of political participation, they set the precedent, but does not mean that all of them stepped forward. Not all women of the elite families stepped forward. There were several households which restricted the women, compelling them to take to clandestine activities. So, without bringing to the awareness of the senior ladies in the family or the menfolk in the family, women got involved in clandestine activities. So significant was this phase, at least second phase of the freedom movement, was mass participation of women. Both, particularly, my interest is rural and marginalized. I'm, of course, urban space also women came in, but women of the rural and the marginalized sections joining the fray of the movement was most significant. It was the issues addressed during this phase that became important. So, coming from different socio-economic fabric, each section had its own experiences, and compulsions also varied, particularly under colonialism. So it was, be it surreptitious activities or otherwise, women did participate in a large scale. In fact, many a time, when I had taken one of the projects, and I had interviewed some of the women a long time back, interviewed some of the women in the rural areas. Then I just asked them, "Why did you go to jail?" They just said, "Annamappa Karda, our father called us, so we went and we fought. We were in the strikes." Have you seen Gandhiji? They had not seen Gandhiji, but yet it was Gandhiji's call. It was the message of Gandhiji that became important. Not all people, at least in the rural areas or remote places, did see Gandhiji or any of the nationalist leaders. It was the message, because their property was being confiscated. Their cows, their household articles were being auctioned. They were confiscated and being auctioned. So, deprived of a means of living, many of the peasantry, actually, women of the peasant classes, also jumped into the fray of the movement. In fact, we have several instances, even in Karnataka, of the daughters of village headmen sitting in front of their own houses in Satyagraha and against their father for confiscating the property of the people. All such activities were associated with the home. Okay. So women boldly faced violent attacks, threats by the henchmen of the villages, and still women were emboldened enough to go ahead excuse me, go ahead with the fight that they had joined. One other item that compelled or propelled women into the movement was liquor. Liquor. So temperance had much appeal to women as they were victims of abuse for long, particularly in the rural and the marginalized sections of the society, and women did come into the fray. So they had hardly any exposure. Like I said, they hardly knew the nationalist leadership, but still, one way which one unconventional sources that we have, which brought women into the movement, was uh, Lavanis, that is the ballads, speeches, plays, and messages. So these unconventional sources, which we have in large numbers, itself is an indicator of the degree of influence of this influence of the struggle upon the women folk in particular. Poetry, ballads, dramas, and even pamphlets became vehicles of creating awareness among the people. It was these indigenous forms of communication which kept alive the spirit and flame of the nationalist women. Indian nationalism had an intimate connection with the national with the patriotic songs, and interestingly, it was more symbiotic. One, I could say, it became a tool of expression. There used to be street singing, chorus during Prabhat Peris or even other times, chorus, and these techniques, which were adopted by the wandering minstrels. Wandering minstrels were those singers who would be going from one place to the other, wandering. ನಾವು ಅಲೆಮಾರಿ ಗಾಯಕರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಈ ಅಲೆಮಾರಿ ಗಾಯಕರು ಒಂದೂರಿಂದ ಮತ್ತೊಂದೂರಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ದಾಗ, ದೇ ವುಡ್ ಕ್ಯಾರಿ ದಿಸ್ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಥ್ರೂ ದ nationalist message through these tools. Singing, one of the most important tools was singing. So they would be singing about the martyrs, okay, and even certain historical figures. So these patriarchal songs had maximum appeal to the people. There were also a number of poet singers. Okay, they would compose and they would be singing in public places, and these songs were mainly patriotic songs, and this brought in an immediate response from the people. There are innumerable number of such songs. In fact, Dr. Suryanath Kamath, at least ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನನಗೆ ಗುರು ಅವರು, he has composed, I'm sorry, he has edited the book ಗೇಯ ಗೀತೆಗಳು ಅಂತ. So very interesting songs we have, and well, I could just provide, because this is a kind of a message that was given by many of the poets through their patriotic songs, or even by way of ballads to the people across the country. Across the country, I could say. So one particular song, Gandhiji Avara Sandesha, Gandhiji's message. Okay, it was one by, I could just quote, of course I'll be explaining in English. It was by one Tippaya Master, and it was composed in 1930. So he says that councils are to be rejected. One should not be aspiring for the councils. Wakalat Nama is to be rejected. Schools, a boycott of schools and colleges was to be carried out. Swadeshi cloth is to be worn, and Videshi cloth is to be rejected, and there should be no army. We don't need a ladai sainya beda. So we don't need a army, and we don't need any weapons. So Swarajya, we want Swarajya. So that we will have to procure. In fact, in another song by one Simpilingana also, he highlights Swadeshi, where he speaks of spinning. So spinning through that, we will have to save our country. So we will have to stop drinking liquor, ganja, and so on, and even tea and coffee is to be rejected. We should also reject government employment. Hindu Muslim harmony, we'll have to live in a harmonious way, he says. So Hindu Musalmanaru Kudi Balabeku Yenda Shanya Gandhi. So the very title of this song is Shanya Gandhi. So this is how Gandhiji's message was carried from house to house. So we have a large number of such ballads also. And in one of the ballads, very interesting is where we have mythological heroic characters. Okay. One Punduru Lakshmi Narayana has written this in his Bharatige Mangala, and where he goes in for it's a comparison of the nationalist leaders with these mythological heroic characters. For instance, Navroji is compared to Bhishma. So, as one who sowed the seeds of Swaraj. In fact, the term was first used by Navroji. Okay. Tilak was compared with Surya as one who spills light, Gokhale to Dronacharya as one who nourished Swaraj, and Gandhiji to Krishna as the Redeemer. Okay. And then Udaraka, the Redeemer, and Lajpat Rai to Dharmaraya or Yudhishthir as the upholder of Dharma, Shaukat Ali to Bhima, that is strength, indicating strength, and Chittaranjan Das to Arjuna as a genius. Okay, the genius. And he says Nipuna. Okay. And Bose, Netaji Bose, and Nehru to Nakula and Sahdeva, because they were supposed to be the learned and wise. Gnanigalunu hage anta. So this was sung as, this entered into the household. So women became familiar with this kind of a ballad, and they used to sing as a lullaby. Laliyagi harta idru anta. So it is also trying to give a message to the child that was being put to sleep by the women. So it was such of the songs that attracted large number of people, and even during the Salt Satyagraha, there was a call given to all sections of society. So Gandhiji is going on Dandi Yatra and to condemn the hegemony of the British government. It is the government, and we will have to go in groups and contribute to the movement. So Gandhiji is spoken as a hero, a dhira. Mahatma Gandhi, the song ends with Mahatma Gandhi ki jai and Bharat Mata ki jai. So such of the songs were direct, there were also, I'm sorry, songs directly addressed to women. So where women were inspired to jump into the movement, and that they had as the other half of the humanity, lot to contribute to the movement. In fact, one of the, it is again certain historical figures, at least in so far as Karnataka was concerned, and of course in North India, it was Jhansi Rani Lakshmi Bai, which became an important nationalist symbol. And in the Kannada provinces, of course, it was Jijabai, Shivaji's mother, who inspired Shivaji, and Kittur Rani as one who was fearless. Kittur Rani actually waged battle against the British. For those who do not know Kittur Rani, it was in 1824, much before Jhansi Rani rose in revolt against the British. Okay. It was a heroic fight that came to be put up by Kittur Rani. So she became an important nationalist figure. And in some of the regions, particularly in Uttar Karnataka, it was, of course, Hemaredi Malama was also one such historical figure. So there were a number of ballads as well as songs that came to be spun around several of the events, particularly satyagrahas that had been taking place. So we have a number of songs addressed to the peasants themselves, directly to the peasants. And it was these patriotic songs which touched a very sensitive chord in the hearts and minds of the listeners. So women would also gather in households in the neighborhood and sing the patriotic songs. And insofar as patriotic songs were concerned, children, I could say, would who had their own Vanar Senas, they contributed a lot to these songs. So, when in fact, many of the songs reached the household through the children. It reached their mothers and other women in the household through these children only. So, children would go and learn these songs when they were being sung in the public spaces, and they would bring these songs back home. So, the home place continued to be politically active. Dramas, very interesting dramas. And of course, I know many of these dramas only of the Kannada provinces and the Kannada regions. And there were several dramas staged. Of course, it was centered on Kittur Rani. And in one such drama, she is shown as one who would inspire anybody to jump into the movement. So Kittur Rani, in fact, one of the dramas when it was being staged, a challenge was thrown to the audience by the one who was playing Kittur Rani's role. A challenge was thrown by that person, saying that if Kittur Rani could jump into the battlefield with a sword and a shield and fight against the British, why can't men who sport mustaches also jump into the movement, and why don't they get inspired by what she has done? So it's such of the statements. In fact, in one of the places, such of the statement, the audience, when they left the theater, the drama theater, right in front of the theater, they burnt. It is said that they burnt the foreign cloth, and they also took to cutting of toddy trees. So many of those men who would not participate, we have women as well as other menfolk also distributing saris and bangles for the men who did not participate actively. And this, of course, several cases of Bangalore, it was also brought out in several of the newspapers of that time. Anyway, another unconventional method, of course, was the pamphlets, Karapatrugalo. And these came to be, of course, distributed in a very clandestine fashion, and in which women and children played a very significant role. In the 1930s, at least, there were several of these newspapers, I'm sorry, these pamphlets, which are available in the archives of any of the state, because in Tamil Nadu archives also I've seen, which were, of course, in Tamil. And though I could not decipher, but somebody else helped me in by reading it for me. And Karnataka also, one such pamphlet, Ranaberi, it asks women to emulate Rajput women who had been sacrificing their lives, and for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of the king. So they had to get inspired by such of the historical figures also. And of course, it was excuse historical figures like Jhansi Rani and others also came in here. Shivaji, of course, was an icon, but importantly, Balwadi Mallama, one of the queens who had revolted against Shivaji, who had fought against Shivaji, and she also came to be icon. She may have been defeated, but Shivaji is supposed to have sent her back to the kingdom with great honor, and she also became iconized. But anyway, there is some kind of a paradox in the kind of a glorification itself that came to be taken place that took place during the nationalist movement. But anyway, such of the oral expressions reached ordinary women and men, and they demonstrated great courage. And I'm sure because of these oral narratives, in fact, they negotiated almost the new now negotiated the political activities around the domestic responsibilities. So women did not give up their domestic responsibilities. They continued it in the absence of the husband, food shortages, taking decisions about the children, and many a time stepping out of the household to earn for the sake of the family, but yet contributing to the nationalist movement. So without the menfolk who had been under arrest. Okay, even those from the margins did contribute. They were typical examples of grit, determination in the movement. Excuse me. It was in the Quit India movement during the 1930s, 40s particularly, 1942 onwards, but towards the end of the 1930s and into the 40s, there was an upsurge in the activity and profile of the female population, I could say. So, picketing, preaching on the streets, writing about the nationalist or sending nationalist messages, and also fast unto death, which came to be undertaken by women. Women, in fact, women of many of the leaders' household helped in converting their own homes into unofficial political headquarters. Many others adopted their traditional roles as nurturers and caretakers in the home while further extending their activities into the public space. So, while responding to Gandhiji's advocacy, they did take up spinning and singing patriotic songs. But important is what became important at least is for protecting and providing cover to those booked under seditious laws. So home became an ingenious political site. See, this is what happened in Bengal also. Uh, when the youth started jumping into the fray in the early stages, so-called revolutionaries. Well, I also have difficulty because it is the colonialists who call them as revolutionaries. Okay, they labeled them as revolutionaries. So there were a large number of women who contributed in this ingenious way within their homes, and how they tried to protect the youth, both women, girls, as well as young boys who were hunted by the British then. So it was, of course, women's role was, women were a microscopic minority in that movement. But still, women did contribute in whatever limited means to that movement also. So that is the revolutionary movement I'm talking about. So all these happened within the uh, traditional grid, that is the home space. So 1940s, as I said, there was a greater visibility. And for the first time, we have a large number of school and college girls also jumping into the movement on an unprecedented scale. There were large scale arrests of the leadership, and even including women leaders, hartals, Prabhat Peris, processions. Oh God, family flag hoisting. So hundreds of women a large majority of them from rural areas and towns also joining the movement. There are a large number of girl students who were inspired by their own teachers, women teachers, their peers, and they picketed schools and colleges. So they also joined in the damage of public property. And we have a large number of instances, even in Bangalore colleges also, where girls took to this kind of an activity. Okay. So there were a large number of Bhagini Mandilis, Mahila Samajas, Hindi Prachar Samitis, which also became very active. And one of the most unforgettable incidents that happened, at least in the Kannada provinces, was in the village of Izur, where women and children came to be subjected to heinous crimes because the people of that village declared their village as Swaraj, and
Okay,
that
madam.
includes sexual
Party
sexual assaults also. You are unable to hear me?
Voice
Hello?
is madam. We are able to hear you.
Okay, thank you. We also have a number of industrial labor also jumping into the movement, and girls defying their parents as well as college authorities, and that included large scale authorities. For me, during this phase, the most important space which had characteristics of the domestic space were the jails where large number of women were lodged, and that became a social space as well. Like I said, this social space had all the features of the domestic space, because features of the domestic space had got extended to this public domain. So it was also communal space where women of different religions, social and economic stratas were kept in detention. So there was, I could say, among the women themselves, there was no horizontal hostility. Neither was it among the menfolk in the jails where they were imprisoned. So there was no horizontal hostility at all. In fact, there was solidarity. There was support. It was among women a sense of camaraderie, that was a sense of strong friendship that existed. So it was this kind of a solidarity, a camaraderie that was prevalent in the jails. It was just like women had experienced it in joint families or even in the neighborhoods. Okay. Women may have been forced into these spaces by colonial authority. This was a jail was a colonial space. Okay, they were pushed into or forced into this colonial space, and one thing that they suffered was oppression from the hands of the colonialists. But women took these spaces and made them into caring as well as sites of anti-colonialism. Jails became a site of anti-colonialism in a non-violent fashion. Okay, there were pregnant, there were nurturing women, there were aged, sick, and there were also children, infants, just born, who were carried into the jails. And this is how women took care. They became nurturers. They became protectors of these women. So even in that condition, women in jails faced the colonialist rule and law in a bold fashion. At the same time, they resorted to fasting and rebellious acts, and this was one way, in a non-violent means, of course, one way of contesting colonial power. In fact, in UP, in one of the books on the nationalist movement, uh, uh, it is said that one of the women there in the jail, large number of women had been fasting unto death, and they tried to wean a woman out of the group and told her, you break the fast by taking little bit of food. They are foolish and you don't have to be foolish. So she said, I would like to be a greater fool than the women who are fasting. So this is how they contested the colonial power. They may have been beaten, they may have been subjected to such of the atrocities, yet they defied. So this kind of a defiance itself, this mode of fight, which I could say defied femininity, ಅರಚ್ತು ಸ್ತ್ರೀತ್ವನೇನೆ ಅರಚ್ತಂಗಾಯ್ತು. So it was this defied femininity that was contested. So Suruchi Thapar also speaks of this. So it was colonial homology that came to be constructed on hyper masculinity, and this was what they tried to contest again. So it was a combination for the colonialists, it was a combination of race and hyper masculinity. But that was what Gandhiji had contested, and that is the action put up by these women. In fact, Ashish Gandhi makes a wonderful observance. He says, by giving femaleness an equal share in the making of anti-colonial subjectivity, he speaks of Gandhi and he says, Gandhi, by giving femaleness an equal share in the making of anti-colonial subjectivity, colonial masculinity came to be contested. So it is the Naritva and Purushatva that was upheld as equal, says Ashish Nandi while speaking of Gandhi. So it is this kind of a Ardhanari concept that became important. That is, Gandhiji also says, Purusha and Prakruti, they will have to come together. So it is this kind of a philosophy that came to be invoked by Gandhi. So Purusha and Prakriti, and like the Ardhanari. So which Leela Gandhi, a well-known feminist post-colonial theorist, in analyzing Ashish Nandi's observations, says that she terms it at least as dissident androgyny. That is, androgyny is a combination of male and female characteristics. There is no specific gender here. It is a combination of male and female characteristics. That is Ardhanari. Okay, so this is the term which Leela Gandhi makes use of, dissident androgyny. Okay, please note it. Dissident androgyny. That is a combination of male and female characteristics, and there is no gender. And this is a term used by Leela Gandhi, a well-known feminist post-colonial theorist. Okay, but what I as one who has undertaken a study on women's role in the nationalist movement, what I've observed is several of the works on freedom movement, at least in this, it's a very wide project of decolonization, where women did work, standing shoulder to shoulder and organizing the people on national lines, and women took up this kind of a strategy. But what remains significant is, if we take up this wider project of decolonization, I feel there is a kind of an erasure insofar as from the narratives of from these narratives of the role of women in the nationalist movement. There is a kind of an erasure. ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಇದು ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಐ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಗಿವ್ ಎನ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್. ವಿ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಫೈಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಮೆನ್ Okay, the focus is mainly on men and not completely on women. So there is, I feel, at least maybe you disagree with me, but there is a kind of an erasure, I say, in all the narratives on the freedom movement. It is only of late that works are being brought out on specifically the role of women. In fact, I would just make a mention of one of the works in Kannada, of course, by my own teacher, Professor Kamath, I said, and he has edited the volumes. ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಸಂಗ್ರಾಮದ ಸ್ಮೃತಿಗಳು ಬಹುಶಃ ನಿಮ್ಗೆಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಫೆಮಿಲಿಯರ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ಕೊಂತೀನಿ. It is, of course, it is based mainly on the interviews. It is interviews only that have been brought into these 3 volumes. And in fact, when I went through all the volumes, I found 855 uh, uh, number of people that were interviewed. That is, men are there. And 884 totally people who had been interviewed, and all of them have been brought into the movement. And it is also interspersed with some events there. And interestingly, in 1884, number of people who have been interviewed, 855 are of menfolk, only 29 of women. So this I also found to be some kind of an erasure, and this is there even in several other works too. So it is how, despite women having played a significant role, we do see that there is not much of a coverage given to the role women actually played. Thank you. I wound up my talk. Kindly excuse me, I regret disturbance from my side. I'm having a very bad throat and fever too. Yeah,
It's okay,
any
madam.
questions? Yeah. Haley, any questions?
No, madam.